The ocean and rivers can be deceptively calm, hiding predators whose power and instincts turn ordinary moments into life-or-death encounters, from a pre-dawn shark attack on Cape Cod to a terrifying orca encounter in the Norwegian fjords. In this video, you'll witness 6 events that reveal how quickly adventure, recreation, or celebration can spiral into chaos. At 3 a.m. on December 17, 2025, the Atlantic lay dark and flat along a remote stretch of Cape Cod, where winter had stripped the beach of people and sound, leaving only slow, rolling water and a cold wind that barely touched the surface. Larkin Vale, a 32-year-old surfer who worked seasonal construction and chased empty waves year-round, paddled alone beyond the break, guided by memory rather than sight because the sky was moonless and the shoreline existed only as a darker band behind him. He wore a thick wetsuit and moved steadily, his arms cutting quiet paths through the water as his board rocked gently beneath his chest, and around him seals surfaced and vanished again, their rounded heads appearing as brief shadows before slipping back into the Black Sea. The stillness felt wrong, heavier than usual, as if the ocean were holding its breath, and the lack of whitewater or wind noise made every small splash echo strangely in his ears. Beneath the surface, a great white shark cruised slowly along the outer sandbars, a mature female measuring close to 16 feet, her body thick and powerful after months of feeding on seals that gathered near Cape Cod each winter. Low-light conditions favored her senses and vibrations carried cleanly through the calm water, allowing her to detect irregular movement far ahead as the faint thump and slide of a surfboard reached her lateral line. She angled upward, rising from deeper water with slow, controlled strokes, her outline invisible against the dark surface. At the same time, the smell of mammal and neoprene drifted faintly through the water, enough to trigger investigation rather than immediate retreat. The seals nearby scattered without warning, their sudden acceleration sending sharp pulses through the sea, and the shark accelerated in response, closing the distance in seconds. Larkin felt the shift before he understood it. A subtle lift beneath the board, followed by a violent impact that exploded upward as the shark struck from below and to the side, her jaws slamming shut around his left thigh. The pressure was instant and crushing, and the world inverted as she twisted her head, performing a powerful lateral shake that tore muscle and tendon while spinning him off the board and dragging him under. Cold water rushed past his face as he tumbled, disoriented and weightless, his leg locked in the shark's mouth while his arms flailed against open water, and the pain arrived in a blinding surge that overwhelmed thought and narrowed his awareness to survival. Blood clouded outward in thick plumes, dark and spreading, as the shark released and veered away, confused by resistance and the unfamiliar shape. Larkin kicked upward with his uninjured leg, pushing his body toward the surface as he fought shock and the instinct to freeze. When his head broke the air again, he clutched at the board's leash, hauling himself forward despite the agony radiating from his torn thigh. The water around him churned as he scrambled across the board, leaving a smeared trail behind him as he began a desperate, uneven paddle toward the barely visible shore. The shark circled once more at a distance, drawn back by blood, but deterred by the chaotic movement and the sudden proximity of shallow water. Then she faded into deeper darkness, resuming a hunting pattern that no longer included the struggling human. Larkin continued forward, each stroke slower than the last, his strength draining rapidly as blood loss and cold set in, and the long stretch of beach felt impossibly far. By the time the tide carried him into the inner break, his movements had become small and mechanical, driven by reflex rather than intention. When waves finally pushed him onto wet sand, he collapsed beside his board, barely aware of the freezing air and the weight of his own body. Hours passed before first light revealed his shape near the shoreline, where early patrol lifeguards conducting a winter check spotted him and rushed to stabilize him before calling for emergency transport. He reached the hospital alive, though critically injured, and surgeons worked for hours to repair shredded muscle, severed vessels, and extensive tissue damage caused by the shark's serrated teeth and twisting force. He survived, but the injuries altered his mobility permanently, ending his time in heavy surf and reshaping his future in ways he could not yet grasp. In the weeks that followed, investigators documented the bite pattern and tooth spacing, confirming the animal's size and species. At the same time, ocean data from that night showed how several subtle factors aligned. Air temperatures near freezing flattened the sea, offshore winds vanished, and the calm surface amplified vibration while reducing visual clarity for predators hunting close to shore. Larkin remained hospitalized, undergoing repeated surgeries to control infection, restore blood flow, and stabilize damaged tissue. Although he survived, His recovery was long and uncertain, marked by limited mobility and lasting nerve damage. The incident underscored how pre-dawn surfing during peak seal season placed humans within an active feeding corridor, where great white sharks relied on silhouette and movement rather than detailed recognition, increasing the risk of severe investigative bites even in familiar waters. Along that stretch of Cape Cod, seals continued to gather, and sharks followed them as they always had, indifferent to human presence, leaving behind reports, scars, and a permanent reminder that solitude and skill offered no protection when conditions quietly shifted. On July 14, 2024, the channels between low coral islands in the Maldives lay bright and glassy under a hard tropical sun, the water so clear that movement below the surface appeared magnified and closer than it truly was. Lena Morales, a 29-year-old adventure guide who had spent several seasons chasing high-adrenaline water sports across the Indian Ocean, prepared to test a flyboard system during a quiet mid-morning window when tourist traffic was light and currents were slow. She rose steadily above the lagoon as twin jets forced water downward through the board, lifting her body several meters into the air while she balanced with practiced control, knees bent and arms held wide for stability. Beneath her, baitfish formed tight, shifting clouds that flashed silver and blue as they turned in unison, compressed against the shallows by unseen pressure from deeper water. The engine noise cut sharply through the otherwise calm environment, sending rhythmic vibrations through the water column, and each correction she made caused bursts of spray that slapped the surface and echoed outward. From below, the silhouette of the flyboard and Lena's legs formed a broken shape against the bright sky, irregular and unfamiliar, mimicking wounded prey struggling above a concentrated food source. A tiger shark moved in from the edge of the channel, its body long and thick, measuring close to 12 feet, its vertical striping faint but visible as it passed through bands of sunlight. It had been cruising slowly, following the scent trails and erratic flashes of baitfish, and the combined disturbance of sound, shadow, and pressure triggered a sudden shift from passive movement to direct investigation. With powerful tail thrust, the shark accelerated upward, breaching partially as its jaws snapped shut around the flyboard's rear fin. The impact exploded through Lena's body, jerking her violently off balance as the board twisted sideways and the jets lost alignment. She was thrown forward, spinning, and slammed into the water hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. As she sank briefly beneath the surface, the shark's teeth scraped across her upper thigh, slicing through neoprene and skin in a single tearing motion that left burning pain and trailing blood. The board bobbed away as she kicked upward, her movements frantic and uneven, churning the water into white turbulence that carried sound and vibration in every direction. The shark circled immediately, tightening its path, drawn by the splashing and the metallic tang of blood dispersing through the warm water. Its movements were controlled and deliberate, not a blind charge, but a methodical assessment. As it passed close enough for Lena to glimpse the pale underside and dark eye rolling slightly, as it tracked her position, she reached the surface and fought to stay oriented, forcing herself to grab the flyboard's control handle while re-engaging the jets with shaking legs. The machine responded unevenly, sputtering power as she half stood, half dragged herself upward, sending erratic bursts of spray that further agitated the scene. The shark lunged again, passing beneath her with terrifying speed, its mouth opening wide before snapping shut just short of her torso as the jets lifted her clear by less than a meter. The rush of displaced water rocked her violently, and she nearly lost her grip as the animal veered away, banking sharply and disappearing into the deeper blue for a brief, dangerous moment. Guides on the nearby safety boat reacted instantly, racing toward her while throwing objects and pounding the surface to break the pattern of movement that had drawn the predator in. The combined noise and visual disruption fragmented the water around her, creating multiple points of focus that pulled the shark's attention outward rather than upward. Lena forced the flyboard forward, angling toward the boat with every ounce of remaining strength as pain radiated from her leg and blood streamed downward in thin ribbons. The jets finally stabilized, allowing her to skim the surface at low height, her balance deteriorating with each second as shock crept in and her muscles began to fail. The shark followed briefly, now maintaining distance, its earlier aggression tempered by the vessel's increased activity and proximity. After one final pass beneath the boat's shadow, it turned away and sank back into the channel, resuming a slow patrol that no longer included the injured human struggling above. Hands reached for Lena as the boat pulled alongside, and she collapsed onto the deck the moment the jets cut off, her body trembling uncontrollably as the extent of her injuries became clear. Deep lacerations marked her thigh, surrounded by swelling and bruising, while smaller abrasions streaked her arms and ribs from the violent fall. She was stabilized and transported to shore within minutes, where medical staff cleaned and closed the wounds before transferring her to a regional hospital for further evaluation. The damage was serious but survivable, and although muscle had been torn and nerves irritated, no major vessels were severed, sparing her from catastrophic blood loss. In the days that followed, marine specialists reviewed footage and environmental data, noting how flyboarding created a unique risk profile when conducted over prey-rich waters. Elevated silhouettes, sustained engine noise, and high-energy splashing combined to mimic injured animals struggling near the surface, triggering investigative strikes from apex predators like tiger sharks that rely on opportunistic feeding strategies. Lena remained under observation for several weeks, undergoing treatment for infection risk and deep tissue trauma, her recovery slowed by the physical and psychological weight of the encounter. The incident became a case study across the region, reinforcing warnings that even controlled recreational activities could rapidly escalate when conducted in biologically active zones. The lagoon returned to its usual calm within hours, baitfish reforming their schools and predators continuing their ancient routines, indifferent to human fear. For Lena, the memory remained vivid and permanent. A reminder that speed, noise, and elevation did not create safety, and that in warm, clear waters where food was abundant, the line between thrill and survival could vanish in a single violent surge from below. The first light of September 6, 2023, crept across the Pacific as a thin gray band, barely lifting the darkness from the water along a quiet stretch of open coastline where autumn seals had begun to gather again. Elliot Crane, a 51-year-old surfboard shaper with decades of experience reading tides and foam lines, paddled alone toward the outer break, moving with calm efficiency through water that lay unnaturally smooth and reflective. The ocean was glassy and still, the kind of surface that absorbed sound and made distance hard to judge, and the only movement came from small ripples where seals surfaced briefly before slipping under again. Their rounded heads appeared without warning, black against silver water, then vanished, leaving expanding rings that faded almost immediately. Elliot had come out before sunrise to retrieve a loose board that had broken free during the previous afternoon session and drifted past the lineup overnight. He followed its faint outline as it bobbed beyond the breaking waves. The task felt routine, something he had done many times before, and the quiet reinforced a sense of control as he closed the distance. Beneath the surface, a great white shark cruised along the edge of the seal corridor, its body massive and deliberate, measuring close to 15 feet from nose to tail. It moved slowly through cooler water, conserving energy, guided by subtle pressure changes and the low-frequency signals of movement above. The drifting board created irregular disturbances as it rocked and pivoted, and Elliot's approach added new vibrations, distinct and unfamiliar, as his arms entered and exited the water in a steady rhythm. The shark angled upward slightly, curiosity sharpening into focused interest as silhouette and motion aligned in the low-light conditions. Elliot reached the board and leaned forward to grab the leash, shifting his weight and dipping his upper body toward the surface, his movements momentarily awkward as the two boards knocked together. The combined shapes created a broken outline against the sky, and the water around him darkened as something large displaced volume beneath. Without warning, the shark surged vertically from below, accelerating in a sudden burst of power that detonated the surface into whitewater. Its jaws closed around Elliot's torso with crushing force, teeth penetrating neoprene, muscle, and bone as the impact snapped both boards violently upward. The force drove him beneath the surface instantly, spinning him as the shark twisted its head and dragged him downward in a chaotic rush of bubbles and blood. Water roared past as his body was pulled under, and the surface above collapsed into froth as the shark shook once more, severing critical tissue. Farther inside the break, several surfers watched as the ocean erupted without explanation, the smooth water exploding into spray as fragments of fiberglass shot upward. One half of Elliot's board surfaced briefly before sinking again, its jagged edge unmistakable even at a distance. The shark released almost as quickly as it had struck, recoiling from resistance and unfamiliar structure, and disappeared into deeper water with a single powerful sweep of its tail. The turbulence faded rapidly, leaving only expanding foam and a widening stain that spread thinly across the surface. Surfers closest to the scene paddled hard toward the disturbance, their movements frantic and uneven as they scanned the water for any sign of Elliot. Pieces of broken board floated between them, and one leash drifted free, slack and empty. They reached him within minutes, pulling his body onto a board and racing toward shore as blood streamed behind them in a narrow trail. The injuries were catastrophic. His torso was torn open by the force and serrated teeth, and despite immediate efforts to stabilize him, there was no response. Emergency services arrived quickly once the alarm was raised, but the damage had been fatal, and Elliot was pronounced dead shortly after being brought onto the beach. The quiet shoreline that had seemed so calm at dawn filled with movement and urgency, then slowly fell silent again. In the investigation that followed, officials documented the bite pattern and the snapped boards, confirming the size and species involved. The environmental conditions that morning showed classic risk factors, including low light, calm seas, and active seal populations near shore. Experts noted that lone retrievals beyond the break placed individuals directly within hunting zones during peak feeding periods, where great white sharks relied heavily on silhouette and motion rather than detailed visual confirmation. Leaning forward over a board created a profile similar to wounded prey, particularly when combined with drifting equipment. Elliot's experience and familiarity with the ocean offered no protection against the alignment of conditions that morning, and the attack followed patterns documented in previous fatal encounters. The shark's behavior was consistent, with a powerful, rapid investigative bite, followed by rapid disengagement. Within days, the water returned to its usual rhythm, surfers cautiously resuming sessions as seals continued to gather offshore, indifferent to human loss. For those who had witnessed the eruption at dawn, the image remained fixed and unsettling, a reminder of how quickly calm water could turn lethal. Elliot Crane's death underscored the persistent risks present even during routine tasks, especially when performed alone in biologically active waters. The ocean that had shaped his life and career did not change its nature that morning, and the glassy surface concealed forces that could transform experience in a single moment into finality. On October 3, 2024, night settled heavily over the open Pacific, hundreds of miles from the nearest land, where the sea stretched uninterrupted in every direction beneath a cloudless sky. Noah Brennan, a 40-year-old solo sailor midway through a long-distance passage, worked by headlamp on the deck of his anchored sailboat, focused on repairing torn rigging damaged earlier that day when a squall line had swept through with little warning. The ocean around him was unusually calm after the storm, its surface rolling slowly and reflecting moonlight in broken silver patterns. In contrast, fragments of driftwood and storm debris floated nearby, rising and falling with the swell. The stillness carried a sense of exposure, amplified by the isolation of being alone so far offshore, where help existed only as a distant concept rather than a practical reality. As Noah leaned outboard to secure a loose line, the boat rocked subtly, shifting his weight just enough to send him off balance. His boots slipped on damp fiberglass, and before he could recover, his body tipped sideways. It disappeared over the rail, hitting the water with a sharp splash that echoed unnaturally loud in the surrounding silence. The cold shock stole his breath as he surfaced beside the hull, instinctively grabbing for a dangling safety line trailing in the water. The sailboat loomed above him, dark and vertical, its shadow cutting a hard line across the moonlit surface as the slow swell pushed him gently away and then back again. He kicked to stabilize himself, keeping his body upright, aware that the open ocean at night was not a place for prolonged exposure. Beneath him, the water felt deep and empty, but the sensation of being watched crept in almost immediately, sharpened by every ripple and shifting reflection. Within minutes, a pale shape emerged at the edge of the moonlight, moving with lazy confidence just below the surface. An oceanic white-tip shark, large and thick-bodied, circled once at a distance before drifting closer, its blunt snout and white-tipped fins catching the light as it passed beneath floating debris. The shark's movements were slow and deliberate, its body language investigative rather than aggressive, but its proximity tightened Noah's chest as it brushed past the safety line with its flank. The line twitched in his hand, transmitting the contact directly into his grip, making the animal's presence impossible to deny. As he drew himself closer to the hull, pulling hand over hand along the rope, the shark turned sharply and nudged the line again, this time with more force. The contact vibrated through the rope, and Noah froze momentarily, fighting the instinct to thrash as he remembered that erratic movement could escalate interest rather than deter it. When he kicked again toward the boat, the shark accelerated suddenly, closing the distance in a smooth, powerful surge. Its jaws opened and snapped shut around the safety line just inches from Noah's hand, severing the rope cleanly with a dull crack that echoed through the water. The broken end recoiled uselessly as Noah flinched backward, barely keeping his balance as the shark passed beneath him and circled again. Almost immediately, a second oceanic white-tip appeared from the darkness. Slightly smaller but equally confident, drawn in by the disturbance and the struggling figure beside the hull. The two sharks moved independently but with a shared focus, crossing paths and tightening their circles, their white-tipped fins flashing intermittently as they rose toward the surface. Their presence transformed the calm sea into a confined space, every movement magnified and consequential. Noah forced himself to remain vertical, keeping his legs beneath him to avoid splashing, while slapping the water sharply with one hand against the hull in short, controlled strikes. The noise reverberated through the metal and fiberglass, sending vibrations outward as a warning rather than a signal of weakness. The sharks hesitated but did not retreat, maintaining close range as Noah edged sideways along the hull, gripping small fittings and seams with numbing fingers. Rope burns flared across his palms as he dragged himself forward inch by inch, his wetsuit catching and tearing against protruding hardware. One shark brushed past his calf, its rough skin scraping lightly through neoprene, while the other rose beneath his knees before banking away at the last second. Each pass tested his control, demanding restraint, even as adrenaline screamed for faster movement. The latter finally came into reach, its metal rungs cold and slick as Noah wrapped both arms around it and hauled himself upward with everything he had left. Water streamed from his suit as he climbed, his legs trembling violently as the shark circled below, lingering for several tense moments before slowly drifting away into the darkness. He collapsed onto the deck, heart hammering uncontrollably, his hands shaking as he lay flat and stared upward, letting the night air burn his lungs back to normal rhythm. Rope burns striped his palms. His wetsuit was torn at the thigh, and his body felt hollowed out by shock rather than injury. For a long time he remained motionless, listening to the gentle slap of water against the hull and the faint creak of rigging overhead. The ocean had returned to its deceptive calm, offering no sign of the predators that had pressed so close moments earlier. In the days that followed, the incident was reported and analyzed by maritime safety experts, who pointed to the classic behavior of oceanic white-tip sharks in open water environments. Known for their persistence and curiosity, especially at night near isolated vessels, the species frequently investigated anything that entered their domain, often testing objects with their mouths. Noah's survival hinged on maintaining vertical posture, controlled movement, and constant contact with the vessel, strategies known to reduce escalation during open ocean encounters. His experience reinforced long-standing warnings about working overboard at night in remote waters where a single slip could transform routine maintenance into a fight for survival. The sailboat continued its journey days later, carrying visible marks of the encounter in frayed lines and scuffed hull paint. For Noah, the memory lingered far longer, etched into muscle and instinct, a reminder that in the open ocean, isolation magnified every mistake and darkness belonged to those perfectly adapted to it. On February 18, 2019, the Brisbane River ran high and fast after days of relentless rain, its usual brown surface swollen into a wide, opaque channel that pressed hard against its banks and swallowed familiar landmarks. Trees leaned into the current, their lower branches submerged, while floating debris drifted past in slow, dangerous arcs carrying leaves, broken limbs, and the faint smell of runoff from far upstream. Declan Ward, a 34-year-old outdoor enthusiast with years of casual kayaking experience, led a small group onto the river that morning, joined by Sienna Harper and several friends who had paddled together many times before. They believed the conditions were manageable, trusting their familiarity with the waterway and underestimating how floodwaters would change not just the river's shape, but its occupants. The current moved with quiet force, disguising its speed beneath a smooth surface broken only by swirling eddies near the banks. Schools of baitfish flickered just below visibility, driven far upriver by the surge, clustering near calmer pockets behind submerged obstacles where the flow slackened briefly. Bull sharks had followed that same movement, using the murky floodwater as cover as they pushed inland from coastal zones. Their tolerance for fresh water and preference for low-visibility environments allowed them to hunt aggressively where other predators could not, relying on pressure changes and vibration rather than sight. Declan paddled slightly ahead of the group, angling toward what appeared to be a calm stretch near a partially submerged tree, its branches forming a tangled lattice beneath the surface. He slowed to assess a safe path around it, dipping his paddle gently while his kayak drifted forward with the current. Without warning, the water beneath him bulged upward as a massive shape surged from below. A 12-foot bull shark rammed the kayak with explosive force, its blunt head striking the hull hard enough to crack fiberglass and throw Declan forward. Before the boat could fully capsize, the shark's jaws closed around his torso, teeth punching through his life vest and clothing with devastating precision. The impact dragged both man and kayak to the side, spinning them into submerged branches as the shark thrashed violently, using the current to amplify its strength. Declan vanished beneath the surface, his body pinned and twisted as roots and limbs wrapped around him, while blood spread instantly through the brown water in thick clouds. Sienna watched in disbelief as the kayak shattered and disappeared, the river erupting briefly before smoothing over as if nothing had happened. She paddled hard toward the disturbance, her strokes frantic and uneven while the others struggled against the current, their movement slowed by shock and debris. The shark released briefly, then surged again, biting deeper as it maneuvered within the confined space, its body scraping against wood and roots as it tore at Declan with short, brutal motions. Each movement sent vibrations through the water that the group could feel even at a distance, a physical reminder of something powerful and uncontrollable just beneath the surface. Sienna reached the edge of the submerged tree and leaned forward, searching unthinkingly into the opaque water. Still, visibility was non-existent, and the current pushed her kayak sideways, threatening to pin her as well. She backed away, fighting to stay upright, her heart hammering as the river carried fragments of debris past her knees. The bull shark finally disengaged, slipping back into the deeper channel as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind tangled branches, broken fiberglass, and a spreading stain that drifted downstream. Declan's body remained caught beneath the tree, partially submerged and motionless, held in place by roots that refused to give. Emergency services were called immediately, but reaching the location proved difficult as flooded access points and strong currents delayed response. Rescue crews arrived to find the group exhausted and shaken, clinging to their kayaks as the river continued to surge around them. Divers entered the water only after conditions allowed, carefully navigating the submerged hazards before freeing Declan from the branches. His injuries were catastrophic, consistent with a large predatory shark attack compounded by blunt trauma and entanglement, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. In the days that followed, authorities assessed the conditions that led to the attack, noting that heavy rainfall had significantly altered the river's ecosystem. Floodwaters displaced prey species and reduced visibility, creating ideal hunting conditions for bull sharks that routinely move upriver during such events. Experts emphasize that the shark's behavior matched known patterns, including sudden ambush attacks in turbid water where silhouettes and vibration replaced visual confirmation. Kayaks, with their low profile and rhythmic movement, closely resembled natural prey in those conditions, especially when paddlers paused or drifted. The presence of multiple people nearby offered no protection, as the attack unfolded in seconds, and the environment prevented effective intervention. The river itself became an obstacle, turning witnesses into bystanders unable to reach the victim despite their proximity. Declan's death sent shockwaves through the local paddling community, prompting renewed warnings about floodwater activity and predator movement. Signage was updated, and advisories stressed avoiding river recreation after heavy rain, regardless of prior experience. The Brisbane River slowly receded over the following weeks, returning to its familiar banks and patterns, while debris settled and fish redistributed themselves downstream. Bull sharks moved back toward coastal waters as conditions normalized, leaving little visible trace of their inland presence. For those who had been there that morning, the memory of the sudden violence remained vivid and unresolved. The river that had once represented routine adventure had revealed a hidden danger, demonstrating how quickly altered conditions could turn a familiar environment lethal. The incident stood as a stark example of how floodwaters collapse boundaries between human activity and apex predators, removing warning signs and reaction time alike. In the end, Declan Ward's death underscored a harsh reality of river systems in extreme conditions, where power, invisibility, and instinct could converge without warning, leaving no margin for escape. On June 12, 2021, the Norwegian fjords were painted in the crystalline clarity of early summer, sunlight glinting off jagged cliffs that rose vertically from icy waters, creating a narrow corridor of reflection and shadow that seemed almost sacred in its serenity. Maya Lindstrom, a 38-year-old entrepreneur with a taste for exclusivity and adventure, had brought a small group of close friends aboard her private yacht to celebrate her birthday, seeking a morning of quiet luxury far from the bustle of the mainland. The yacht, a sleek vessel with polished teak rails and a deep-hulled frame, floated gently in the narrow channel, the engine idling softly while champagne chilled on silver trays and conversations meandered, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. Guests leaned against the rails, the cold spray of fjord water brushing occasionally against their legs, and no one sensed the tension simmering just below the surface, invisible and vast where the water darkened with silent life. Beneath the hull, the fjord's depth created a shadow domain perfect for the pod of orcas that had lingered unseen, their powerful black and white forms gliding through cold currents with effortless control. The pod had been navigating the fjord for hours, hunting fish that migrated along the sheltered waters, their movements deliberate and intelligent, guided by centuries of evolutionary strategy. Each whale communicated in subtle clicks and whistles, a language of the deep while scouting for anomalies in the reflective surface above. Maya's guest remained oblivious, the morning's joy uninterrupted until the first sign of danger struck with shocking suddenness. A massive orca, easily 23 feet in length and bulked with muscle visible even beneath its sleek skin, surged from the depth directly beneath the starboard hull. The force of its ascent struck with a roar of displacement, the hull shuddering violently as water exploded in a spray that drenched guests and shattered the illusion of safety. Champagne glasses toppled, corks popped unpredictably, and the first shouts of alarm rang out as the boat listed sharply. Glass cut fingers and arms as guests clung to rails, their bodies thrown against metal and teak with the sudden tilt, and crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel, bracing themselves against sudden, terrifying movement. The orca's eyes glinted briefly above the waterline before it disappeared in a wash of white froth, leaving the yacht rocking precariously, but still afloat. No more than moments passed before another orca breached beside the stern, massive jaws snapping at the anchor line that had been lowered for security. The line tore under pressure, sending the anchor tumbling into the depths and leaving the yacht untethered, now at the mercy of the fjord's currents. Guests screamed and backed toward the center, furniture sliding underfoot. At the same time, Maya gripped the nearest support, her mind racing with disbelief at the intelligence and audacity displayed by the animals around them. The pod did not retreat immediately. Instead, they circled the yacht with precision, striking repeatedly with their powerful bodies. One whale rammed the hull from the port side, while another struck near the bow, each impact sending waves of force through the structure, tipping drinks, tearing at ropes, and testing the yacht's stability. Water surged across the deck, chilling arms and ankles as the guests struggled to maintain footing, while small personal items floated away or shattered in the commotion. Crew and guests reacted instinctively, grabbing oars and brooms to splash the water and bang against the hull, attempting to intimidate the pod or at least signal human resistance. Yet every attempt was met with the whale's persistent curiosity and sheer power, their movements coordinated and responsive, revealing a level of awareness that left the humans momentarily helpless. Each strike was calculated, designed more to explore and challenge than to destroy outright, yet the consequences were immediately tangible in splintered teak and leaking seams. Maya and her friends fought to remain calm, ducking each sudden surge and bracing against the rails, shouting to one another to stay together while assessing injuries and making sure no one fell overboard. The water, icy and unforgiving, reflected every movement in stark contrast. A flash of white from a breached whale, a dark shadow from beneath the hull, and the chaotic spray that mingled with the airborne debris of personal belongings and shattered glass. Minutes stretched like hours as the whales continued their assault, circling, breaching, and ramming with intelligence that suggested not blind aggression, but targeted exploration of the unusual object intruding in their territory. Every impact vibrated through the deck and hull, eliciting small groans from stressed planks and metal fittings, reminding the passengers of the fragility of human engineering in the face of raw natural force. Finally, after multiple passes, the pod began to withdraw, slipping beneath the surface as swiftly as it had appeared. Their retreat left the yacht listing slightly and waterlogged in patches, the anchor lost, ropes shredded, and deck furniture scattered. Crew immediately moved to assess structural damage, tighten remaining lines, and recover floating items while tending to minor cuts and bruises sustained from flying debris and splintered wood. No serious injuries had occurred, though shock and bruising marked several guests, and the sudden awareness of mortal vulnerability lingered in every hand grip and glance across the deck. Maya stood at the center, chest heaving, surveying the chaotic aftermath, the yacht still afloat but forever changed by the encounter. Marine biologists later analyzed the incident, noting that orca behavior in Norwegian fjords often combined natural curiosity with testing of objects that displayed unexpected movement, shape, or noise. Birthday parties in private vessels, usually seen as benign intrusions, became sources of rapid interest when whales interpreted unusual silhouettes and movement patterns as potential threats or stimuli worthy of investigation. The repeated ramming was consistent with known pod behavior, coordinated, communicative, and remarkably attuned to the physical response of their target. Reports emphasize that while rare, Such interactions illustrate the enormous power and intelligence of apex marine predators, particularly in semi-enclosed fjord systems, where their size, maneuverability, and communication enable sustained assessment of new elements in their environment. Even minor miscalculations in proximity or vessel presentation can provoke curiosity-driven assaults, capable of damaging small yachts and alarming humans. In the hours following the attack, Maya and her crew worked to stabilize the vessel, pump off accumulated water, and rig temporary anchor lines to prevent drifting. Guests assisted where possible, recovering personal items and checking for injuries while remaining vigilant for the pod's return. The fjord, quiet again but layered with the echo of chaos, reflected the morning sunlight off jagged cliffs as though nothing had occurred, leaving the humans to reconcile the terror they had just witnessed. The birthday celebration, intended as a private, elegant gathering amid dramatic natural beauty, became an event defined by survival and respect for the uncontrollable forces of nature. Friends recounted the sequence repeatedly, each retelling emphasizing the whale's strength, intelligence, and uncanny timing. At the same time, crew members documented hull damage, water levels, and the sequence of breaches for insurers and marine authorities. Ultimately, the yacht remained afloat and no guests sustained life-threatening injuries, but the experience left an indelible mark on all present. The encounter was widely studied as an example of orca intelligence and coordinated behavior during interactions with unfamiliar vessels, highlighting both the unpredictable nature of apex predators and the limitations of human control in isolated marine environments. For Maya Lindstrom, the morning combined awe, terror, and an acute understanding of scale. The delicate balance between human engineering and natural power, the unpredictability of animal behavior, and the thin margin separating celebration from chaos in the heart of one of the planet's most majestic fjord systems. Even as the whales receded into deep water, their presence lingered in memory, a reminder of raw force and intelligence capable of overturning the quiet certainty of a seemingly ordinary morning in a single devastating surge. By midday, the fjord had returned to its deceptive calm. Sunlight gleamed off the cliffs, and the yacht floated silently, deck soaked, hull scarred, and guests silent in reflection. The orcas had vanished as mysteriously as they appeared, leaving behind a story of sheer power, intelligence, and survival that would be retold in both awe and disbelief for years to come. A singular memory of a birthday celebration transformed into a lesson in respect for the forces lurking beneath even the most beautiful surfaces of the natural world.